Well, it's a strange thing about having a malady like this, because you feel you must make at the same time preparations to die and to live.
Tell me a little bit about how you discovered that you were sick.
I was on my book tour for my memoir, Hitch 22, and I woke up one morning. I thought, this is not. I wrote it like this at one point, trying to be funny. I've woken up in the past feeling like death, but actually this could be the real thing. I couldn't really move, and my whole sort of chest cavity seemed to have been filled overnight with some kind of cement. And I wasn't sure I was breathing or my heart was beating. It was very frightening and quite clearly something out of the ordinary. And I was in New York, and I managed to get the emergency services to come. It took me a long time to get to the phone, but once that happened, everything happened very quickly. And I discovered that my pericardial sac, the bit around my heart, the liquid that protects your heart, had sort of swollen up to the point where my heart couldn't move very well, if at all. Which may or may not have been related to my malady, but at any rate, before I left the hospital, they told me that my next appointment should be with an oncologist, the first time I'd ever heard the word really, because they'd found there was a unpleasantness somewhere in my chest area, a shadow of some sort, which proved to be a tumor in my esophagus, which had, by the time it was found and identified, had metastasized to my lymph glands, the palpable ones, the nodes that you can feel along your clavicle, along your collarbone, and possibly infringed into my lung. I'm not clear on that.
And so what was the diagnosis then?
Well, metastasized cancer of the esophagus.
And you said your father died of it.
Which rang immediately with me, resonated, as people say, because that's what killed my father when he was 79. I'm 62, my next birthday. And like me, my father had been a fairly consistent smoker, mainly a pipe. And he did his share with the bottle as well, but had never been ill until this happened to him, and was killed by it almost immediately. That was in a time when esophageal cancer wasn't very well understood, as it still is not, in point of fact. So it didn't take me long to find an oncologist, and for him to prescribe a course of chemotherapy for me. And as it was beginning, I thought I would just say to him, look, do you mind, I'm sure you get asked this a lot, what's a good result for someone like me? And what's a bad result? In terms of time, I'd like to be able to budget my time. That's the way I am anyway. And he said, you'd be surprised actually how many people don't ask. He said, I would prefer not to give you an answer until we've tried the therapy and seen if the chemistry works. But as if thinking that might sound like an evasive answer, he said, what I can tell you is if you hadn't come in and started this, you'd be dead in a very few months. So from that I judged that I had got it severely, and that it had taken up some kind of residence. All I can tell you about, I'm now on my I'm coming to the end of my fourth 3-week treatment. I can only take it every 3 weeks. And that the place I was feeling before, and he was feeling, the clavicle, the ones that can be palpated from the outside, have measurably shrunk. So he knows that the cocktail he picked of chemo was a good one. And I'm taking that as an encouraging sign. It's not good to have a cancer that can be felt from the outside, but if you can also, by that simple means, show that it's diminishing, that's something, I suppose.
So what do you think? I mean, what do you expect?
Well, it's a strange thing about having a malady like this, because you feel you must make at the same time preparations to die and to live. And the way I put it in my Vanity Fair article was, lawyers in the morning and doctors in the afternoon, my two favorite professions taking up my life. All I need is a priest now, and I have my three least. At least those I don't have to see. And so I have made a will, which I had never bothered to do before. And I've thought about what this might mean for my children, or will, and about my wife, if she has to become a widow early in life, relatively early in life. But at the same time, if I'm asked, do I want to go and debate Tony Blair on the relevance of religion to the Third World in Toronto in November, I say yes, I'm planning to be around.
Do you think that in some way you might deliberately have been courting death on a subconscious level?
Not courting it, no, but perhaps trying to look it more in the eye, more often in the eye than I would have done when I was in my 40s, yes. To sort of test myself, measure myself against it, sure.
Were you afraid of it?
I'm not afraid of being dead, if you see what I mean. I mean, because I don't think I'll be aware of the fact that I am not there. So there's nothing to repine about in that case. But the way I phrase it in the book is, look, it's not just that you're tapped on the shoulder and told, you have to leave the party. It's quite a good party. You have to leave. Bad enough, and you can't come back. But it's going to go on without you. That's often rather a bitter thought. The only worse thought I can imagine having is being tapped on the shoulder and told, you can't leave. You've got to stay, and the party's going on forever. That would instantly abolish one's desire to stay around, of course. And I think helps to expose the false promise of eternity. But yes, the thought that one day an edition of the newspaper will come out, and with any luck there will be something about me in it, but I won't be reading it. Yeah, I don't like that thought particularly. And then I don't like the thought of dying of esophageal cancer, not if anything I've read about it is even remotely true. You can hope for a bit of gallows humor if you are just going now to the scaffold and it's over in an hour or so. From now, you can hope. I'm not sure I would be very good at coming up with a gallant or witty expression at that point. I think my mouth might be too dry, but it's rather different to be told you've got to be tortured for 6 months or so before the executioner is done with you.
I wonder if you've thought about your funeral, or do you, I mean, you know, you like to party, you've always had a good time. Have you decided what you want to do? I mean, have you...
One of the things that Sigmund Freud says people like to do, but can't, is they try and picture their own funerals. It's a desire, I mean, everyone seems to have it and to have fantasized about it, but the fact of its impossibility doesn't stop people doing it. No, I haven't actually given that much thought, and I don't particularly care about memorial meetings or in what form I'd be corporeally disposed of. I'm leaving myself anything that's worth having can go to the medical community. I mean, maybe my corneas would be some use to someone, or even just the cadaver is useful for dissection. So nothing of that kind bothers me at all. And I have been very lucky in one way, if you call it lucky. I've read a lot about myself while I'm still alive, since it was announced that I was possibly mortally sick. Either in the public prints. I mean, there have been editorials about my being sick. Rather alarming to me that people would go to this trouble, and very flattering. So I've done much better than most people do, I think. I had a chance to work out what will be said after me when I'm not there. This is presumably the more flattering stuff. Not all of it, by the way, but some. That should be enough for anyone, really, I think.
Do you think that you have done what you were meant to do? Do you think that you were put here on Earth to do something special, and do you think that you've accomplished that?
I don't think I had a destiny, no. I'm not enough of a bullfrog to pump myself up to that level, but I've done better than I expected I would do. I would say that. I've written more, published more, which was all I ever wanted to do, than I thought I would. And it's been better received, and by more people, than I thought it would. And I've been very much buoyed up by emails and letters and other communications from readers to whom my stuff seems to have meant something. And so I don't feel that I've failed. But nor do I feel this comes at the perfect time to hang it all up either, no.
I mean, is there something major that you want to accomplish or that you wish you had time to accomplish?
Well, the cause of my life recently, in a sense, the cause of my life as a writer from the beginning has been to oppose man-made delusions, the mind-forged manacles, as William Blake calls them, of superstition and religious totalitarianism. And I know well enough about that it's not a battle you can ever hope to exactly win. There are rounds of it that can be won, but it's something that's going to go on forever. It's innate in the human condition and personality to be having this argument. And I've hugely benefited from taking part in it. I've learned a lot from it. I'd love to be thought of as someone who's contributed something to it. But you could never say you've done enough, no.
When did you get interested in religion?
Well, when I was quite small, at a boys' boarding school in England, Anglican school in a country where the inculcation of Anglican Christianity is, I think, still more or less legally obligatory. And the first things I realized about it were that I didn't believe the stories, but second, that it was being used as a kind of weapon of authority, true or not, that it was being used as a reinforcer by people who seemed to me not to have any special claim to be in charge. And third, that I would not have been able to phrase it like this then, that you could learn a lot from somebody, or about somebody, both from and about actually, depending on whether they thought there was a supernatural dimension or not, or whether they thought that it applied to them, that you could change it by prayer or by incantation. And that I strongly preferred the people who didn't think this.
And when was it that you decided that you wanted to sort of take it on in a big way, which you did, finally?
Well, it's been a thread in almost everything I've ever written, that the highest point of human attainment begins once, as I forget exactly how Immanuel Kant puts it, but when people decide consciously to shed illusions about themselves and about the cosmos. Actually, mind-forged manacles is better. Blake puts it better than Kant. I mean, don't inflict it on themselves anymore. There's enough trouble in the world, enough misery, enough suffering without people saying, the crops have failed because I didn't pray the right way. Or the wells have poisoned, but it's the Jews who've done it. Or there's plague everywhere, but it's because of heresy and sin. So, I mean, all these terrible things we do to ourselves. There comes finally a point, there was a point before in 5th century Athens, and there've been a few other moments in Holland in the 17th century and elsewhere, but since then, well, let's say since the 18th century Enlightenment, where people have stopped doing that to some extent, in fact, where that's become almost common sense. I think that moment is underappreciated. We take it too much for granted. So defending it and its values and trying to advance them, crucial for me in everything I do.
It seemed to me that there was a moment several years ago when your book came out, and God is Not Great, and Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, the sort of four of you, made atheism acceptable, or at least made it a word that people could talk about.
Yes, and look, first of all, long may the illusion persist that I should be mentioned in the same breath as these great scientists and teachers and biologists and neuroscientists and so on, like Richard and Daniel Dennett and Lawrence Krauss and so many others, Steven Pinker, and people who've made real contributions to the sciences. I've done nothing of the sort. But yes, it is certainly true. There was a catalytic moment sometime in the beginning of this millennium where we were confronted at roughly the same time with a horrible resurgence of Islamic jihad, of Islam in its most crude form, conquest-minded, intolerant, fanatical, expansionist, and Messianic Jews hoping they could bring on the Messiah by stealing other people's land in Palestine, getting quite a lot of fanatical Christians to agree with them that that might indeed be an amusing way to bring on the apocalypse. A rogue state run by a criminal theocracy within measurable reach of a nuclear weapon. In other words, a thing we've all discussed since we were kids. What happens when a really bad guy gets sort of a really bad weapon? In other words, what happens when a millennial ideology acquires an apocalyptic arsenal? Well, we're about to find out. And that doesn't exhaust it. I mean, the very ominous developments in Russia, the reappearance of a xenophobic, chauvinistic, nationalist dictatorship with a police regime in Russia, with right at its side the black-cowled advisors of the Russian Orthodox Church who've become Putin's spiritual disguise and alibi. That, by the way, is something we should be keeping a very close eye on, wherever you look. And not to say, in the United States, people demanding that nonsense and pseudoscience be taught to children at taxpayers' expense. So, I could go on, believe me, but time to push back against this. And my guess was that there were many people ready to join such a pushback, and I think simultaneously, or contemporaneously anyway, some of us were thinking the same thing for the same reasons, yeah.
You wrote about a letter you got, or contribution, on one of the websites, and it said, "Who else feels Christopher Hitchens getting terminal throat cancer was God's revenge for him using his voice to blaspheme him? Atheists like to ignore facts. They like to act like everything is a coincidence. Really? It's just a coincidence that out of any part of his body, Christopher Hitchens got cancer, and the one part of his body he used for blasphemy? Yea, keep believing that, atheists. He's going to writhe in agony and pain and wither away to nothing and then die a horrible, agonizing death. And then comes the real fun when he's sent to hellfire forever to be tortured and set afire."
Yes.
How do you debate somebody like that?
Well, I don't think there's any debating people like that, but I, and of course most Christians I know take a rather pitying view of that kind of unpleasantness. But I would still say that until very recently, by very recently I mean a matter of decades, that was something like the official Christian view. You will reap as you've sown. God is not mocked. If you sin and if you don't repent, you will be punished now and in the hereafter. The guy is obviously not a super literate contributor, but he has the weight of most of the Christian centuries on his side. It's only very recently become possible to doubt things like eternal punishment, and by the Catholic Church it still isn't possible to doubt it. He's a bit too glib in saying that I get the cancer I deserve, because as I point out to him, I've blasphemed with many more organs than my throat. The cancer is actually in my esophagus, which is a narrow but deep distinction. And if everyone got the cancer they deserved, it would be observable, I think. I mean, Diego Rivera, great communist painter, got cancer in his penis, in fact died of it. But I don't think that was the main organ of his atheism, if you see what I mean. It can't always be that neat. Still, there are people who do think, if lightning hit me, you know, they would shudder a bit. They'd think, gosh. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. They would not be able quite to think of that as an event in the natural order. And if Christians give up completely on believing that, or Muslims, or Jews, or any other believers, they know, of course, God doesn't act in that way, then they've given up a lot, because all the years in which they taught people that God does intervene in the natural world and does supervise it, would be exposed as a fraud. Look, there's a reason why we do use words like transcendent or ecstatic, or, well, those will do. Numinous was another. No, okay, I'll say it again. There is a reason why we do need words like transcendent or numinous or ecstatic, and I couldn't do without the use of any of those. We've experienced them at sunset, as you and I did recently, with the sense of the end of the beautiful waning of the long day, especially often if it's accompanied by a change of season, or certain kind of music, perhaps, or a memory of a particular person. As landscape will do that, as will architecture. I wouldn't trust anyone who was looking at me bewilderedly at this point. Some people don't seem to feel this, but I think should. I guess my best example of how I believe that can be cherished and indeed refined, but it doesn't have to be part of superstition or the supernatural, would be the Parthenon, about which I wrote a book. There's a building which, if it was destroyed, would make me feel I might as well die. I can't imagine what the world would be like without the Acropolis and its centerpiece. And its symmetry, and its sort of music in stone, and all of it, and its placement, and all of that. But I no longer care, and nobody does. In fact, we don't really even know what the cult of Pallas Athena was. The religion that animated it is gone. Athenian imperialism is no more. You don't have to be nostalgic for it. So the Eleusinian mysteries are mysteries to us. We don't know what they were. I doubt they were all that impressive. So the great cultural task, it seems to me, is preserving what is divine, what is inspirational, transcendent about the human achievement, while rather guarding it from supernatural and superstitious claims. I think that's a cultural achievement one could spend a life working on.